everybody. My name is Leigh Alexander. I am a writer. I work on issues of digital society, digital culture. I host the tech podcast at The Guardian. I do some futurism stuff for an outlet called How We Get to Next. I have a technomancy column in Vice Motherboard where I write about technology and magic. And I've also done a little future fiction, world building, video game stuff. I worked in the video games field. Oh, there we go. Yeah, basically, I don't like to say that I work in tech so much as I work on the things tech enables us to do and the people we become as a result. So even if you're not familiar with my work, which is perfectly allowed, I'm not going to spend a lot of this time talking about myself. You might have heard of me as someone who got harassed on the internet. Internet men hate me. When the men's rights activist website Return of Kings did a list of 27 attractive women who became ugly freaks because of feminism, I was number 1. So I was actually going to make this slide like a collage of the worst and funniest things that have happened to me on the internet and the most funny things they've said, and that we would all laugh. But that kind of ends up, I don't always have the stomach, to be honest, to go and look at it. So my main claim to fame, though, is probably the time that Intel withdrew its advertising from one of the sites that I worked for after it was brigaded by a mob. And they did reinstate the ads, and shortly after that pledged to commit all these financial resources to women in tech, which is awesome. I'm really happy about that. But actually, no one has officially apologized to me yet, so I guess some things are priceless. So when I was invited to come and speak at this festival, the topic that was suggested to me and the session description you have all kindly come this morning to hear, thank you so much for joining me. The topic description is the big disconnect. So how many of you have ever wished that you did not necessarily have to depend on the internet so much? A couple of you, at least. Yeah, a few. I think a lot of you. I know you don't like to raise your hands as often as Americans do, so I'll just imagine. How many of you find it hard to stop thinking about what is in your phone? I see some people are in their phones right now. See, I don't mind, but that's a thing we find it hard to stop doing. And how many have you ever wished, even fleetingly and guiltily, in your heart of hearts, for the internet to just kind of tumble into the sea and disappear? Like, I fantasize about it. Like, I imagine this happening. It's exciting. So I'm assuming that you came to this talk because you were hoping that I would have some advice to offer after having gone through a lot of exposure and scrutiny and double standards regarding my work on how to create boundaries between ourselves and the internet. But let me set the expectations right away. I think this graphic is awful. No offense to the artist, but it's like a hipster mustache doing cultural appropriation. I don't like it that much. So let me say that I can't really help you with this because I think it's kind of too late for the very concept of disconnection, at least not on the terms we're used to for folks like us in this part of the room. There is no such thing as offline. So all the advice we hear about digital detox, I think these days those are starting to become about as useful as articles on how to detox from water. Major parts of our working lives, our social lives, our shopping, our self-expression, all taking place online, and it's only getting worse. That's to say, getting ever more true with time. Kids born today will never know what it's like not to have YouTube or similar. Like parents my age just hand the baby an iPad and the baby knows how to browse for the songs about colors that it wants to watch. The day that you let your child create their first social media profile or their first image sharing account, whatever the equivalent will be, that's going to be a milestone on par with their first day of summer camp or the day they learn to ride their bike. You teach them, you give them information, you teach them how to be safe, and then you let them go off on their own toward this new and irrevocable fact of human society. So have you ever gone to one of those parties where everyone has to unplug their phone or give it to the host or something like that so that they can enjoy each other's company? Have you ever been to one of those cafes that has these signs like this? No Wi-Fi, talk to each other. I hate that, okay? Like, of course, it's poor form to go to a dinner and to have your phone out the entire time. That's rude. There's obviously some etiquette that we want to learn and observe around phones. There's some communication that we have to do with one another to be sure that we're being respectful to the people we're with. But there's really only so much you can do to stem the tide of change in how we act and how we interact. Lots of people go to cafes to work. Like, I don't need, like, I'm not there for, like, you know, some deep in-person meditative experience, you know, or we have to check our phone because we're now more available to our jobs and our families than we've ever been before. We have to check our phone to look up the answer to some question one of our friends had at a table in the bar, the name of some actor we all forgot. It's almost becoming like a second brain that lives in your hand, and you're not just going to put it down because someone wants you to make eye contact with them. You know, paradoxically, I think we're bombarded with more information than ever before, and our attention is fragmented across more different zones than ever. And sometimes just pretending that there is something to do with your thumb on that screen is a moment of self-ownership and even relief. Like, be honest, have you ever pretended that you're in your phone so that other people will leave you alone? I definitely do that. Have you ever dealt with that person who doesn't get the hint no matter how many times you pretend you're like urgently urgently sending an email? You know, when you're busy or you're pretending to be busy and someone makes an executive decision that you need to put the phone down and pay attention to them, perhaps it is that person who is a bit out of touch with the reality of the world today. I will say that this is not really how I hoped anything would turn out. I'm not super stoked on this state of affairs. I used to be an internet evangelist. Nowadays, I'm mistrustful of the word evangelist. I think you got to plan ahead for whatever it is that's going to come that will temper your evangelism, because it will be something. Anyway, a few years ago, I wrote this short ebook called Breathing Machine that was basically a love letter to the early internet. I wrote about growing up online in the 90s, having my adolescence coincide with the flourishing of bulletin boards, early confessional websites, the general wild west of weirdos and shock content that comprised the online experience back in the beginning. The book is not very good. I don't make royalties from it, so you don't need to buy it. But it is on Amazon, or you can contact me privately. I'll sneak you a PDF. So back then, we conceived of the internet as a cool place you could go. We used the term cyberspace, or we called it the information superhighway on the nightly news, and it would be accompanied by images that were associated with travel and with navigation, with spatial possibilities, like Netscape Navigator with the ship's wheel. Apple still calls its browser Safari, because we're thinking about transit and exploration. We used the term World Wide Web, and not only did we use the metaphors about spiders crawling the web to highlight the interconnectivity of these places, we used the iconography of maps and globes as well, if you remember at all. When you went online and you opened up a browser, you knew that you're going on a journey into virtual space, and you never knew where you were going to end up. You could just start browsing around and get lost. I miss that. You know, if you went to a website back then and the webmaster hadn't finished putting everything that they wanted to put on their site, you would see an under construction graphic as if there were literal roadworks going on. Like websites on similar topics would voluntarily kind of join together in rings, web rings, so that you could, in a sense, kind of do this loop walk of different affiliated sites on any individual topic, from TV actors to mystical realms, all kinds of things. And you would also be invited to sign something called a guest book, which would be the webmaster's own log of who around the world had come to that website and what they had thought of it. As a writer on the internet today, I cannot imagine wanting everyone who comes to like a website to leave me a message. That would be awful. So Humans have been writing things like "I was here" on their discoveries since ancient times. That's part of our nature. Like, of course, we want to do this in spaces, even when the space itself is only abstract or only an idea. One of the first things we wanted to do on the internet was write "I was here" on pages that we had been to. I'll never forget the first time that the web felt like a real place to me. I was like maybe 13, 14 years old at the time, and I was looking up Sailor Moon pictures on the internet, as you do, and I found a website called Sailor Moon Sleepover. Whoever had maintained it had written like some very simple, very descriptive text about how you, as a visitor of the site, were invited to a sleepover with the characters from this anime. There was nothing weird or sexual about it, believe it or not. You were just invited to imagine that these characters were your friends, and that you, through the magic of the internet, could go to the place where they were hanging out and take part. And then people would sign the guest book, and in it they would write down what fun they had having cocoa or braiding hair with the cast of Sailor Moon. It was sweet. Yeah, for me as a child, like that was really enough to create a sense of place or a virtual experience at that time. I felt, I was kind of lonely at that age, and a 13-year-old who wants to pretend that she's friends with Sailor Moons, you could probably draw your own conclusions. But like I'd run home after school because I'd have maybe an hour or two alone before the rest of my family started showing up. So like disconnect the telephone from the wall, run along, plug it in the modem, listen to the dial-up sound, and then go try to get some comfort where I could from these mysterious and made-up places and communities that I found online. I couldn't wait to see if there were any emails from the small handful of friends I'd made on message boards about music or poetry. Like, can you imagine today being super excited to get emails and like being glad when there's a lot? So on a practical level, regarding the Sailor Moon Sleepover website, it was just pictures and texts. Now if I Google for Sailor Moon Sleepover, I get 3,000 or 4,000 results, most of them now really not on the lines of what I was looking for. But like on the website that I went to back then, it was just kind of like pictures from the TV show, screen caps. And it's easy to forget that once it was rare and special to find TV pictures on the internet. So this sense of possibility, of the rare and the special, and of transcending what we viewed as the limitations of being human, that was actually part of the draw of cyberspace as a concept. So tech people read a lot of science fiction, and here finally they believed was going to be the fruition of some of the books they read, or at least that's my theory. There's a lot of scholarship on the internet, and I don't mean to represent any of my views as authoritative. This is just sort of my interpretation. So yeah, in the places I used to hang out online as a kid, it was second nature to kind of write as if you were someone else, or to play as a different character, to write an online journal for someone other than yourself. Like some people in my internet circles on like AOL and CompuServe and stuff like that, they would refer to their real world selves as their muns, which was short for mundane. That's very revealing of the fantasy that a lot of early adopters, we expected that we would leave behind our mundane lives and just exist as text and as star stuff and energy and avatars in the world of the virtual. So as much as the internet was abstractly a place for me to escape to as a lonely teen, there were entire industries eventually that began to spring up around taking that concept further, like full-on digital habitats, second lives, second selves. The metaverse concept is probably its own whole separate talk, and one I'm probably not super qualified to give. I didn't really like the book Snow Crash, so someone else can talk about it. But to summarize it imperfectly, just about a decade and a half ago, people were pretty sure that there would be a 3D World Wide Web, or at least some kind of virtual world, or perhaps a few different ones, that we would develop using technology in parallel to the real world. This belief took the concept of the information superhighway and added another dimension. The idea being that if the web was a world, and sites could be literally sites, places, let's make them look like places. Let's make this feel like a world. Let's make business centers, let's make parks, and then let's have second selves in those places too. So we were all going to create avatars. Everyone was going to have an avatar to represent us online. They would go to work in virtual conference spaces. They would cycle through their virtual outfits. We were going to shop at virtual stores, browse lifelike 3D models of real things, buy virtual goods, and for our virtual houses, and maybe even get a real-world equivalent delivered at the same time. People began designing and selling virtual goods, virtual pets, and in some cases, like actually making pretty good money from virtual real estate. This is Ansha Chung's avatar, the first virtual world millionaire. This was a cover of Business Week in 2006, so actually not that long ago. People really thought that this was the face of the future, although I think like when this degree of money gets involved, people are not acting on their best judgment necessarily. When there are a few edge cases that are really outstanding, or a small percentage of people that are thriving in this way, does it signal something that people broadly want? Or is it just, a lot of rich people who see the opportunity to bring their sci-fi books to life? Maybe that's the question we need to ask about the VR space that's in front of us now, but more on that in a bit. So for now, let's say by the time we reach 2010, 2012, the cyberpunk dream of life in virtual reality or the metaverse as imagined by the venture capitalists of the millennium, that hadn't quite materialized yet. Like, again, there was and there still is money being made by, for example, creators in Second Life, but it's a niche economy, and it's fueled mostly by, special skins for avatars or like beds you can actually have sex in, Second Life sex beds. Like truly, in a world with no rules, I mean, people can fly in this world, but they still want to have sex in beds. Like, that's where the money is. Like, we don't even need to have gravity in this fictional world, but, we need a bed that is realistic to have sex in for our avatars. And this is like a collage of Second Life dream homes. Like, this is just like the first 4 that I grabbed off of an easy Google image search, but they're all quite alike. They're all kind of the homogenization of the same architectural fantasy. Do we really all have the same dream home? Is this like the dream home that, like, if we deep dreamed this room, would they make this house? I don't know. And like that was actually, to me, a major problem with the metaverse fantasy. In a reality where anything is possible, dutifully reproducing the values and the norms and the laws of the existing world in virtual space doesn't necessarily make for the most enduring draw. And it might even bring out the worst in us. Like, just like it's human nature to write, "I was here," on everything, apparently. Also, this resolution is really low, but this is Ansha Chung, the Second Life millionaire, being swarmed by pink penises that people made in Second Life to throw at the avatar. Anyone who works in user-generated content has heard the maxim, like, if you give your users the means to create anything, to make their dreams come true, you have at least 30 seconds before someone makes a D. Nobody really planned on that, which seems weird now in hindsight. They definitely should have planned on that. But it made online worlds kind of difficult to get around in for everyone except for the most committed and the most creative and the most virtually expressive types of audiences. And I don't even mean to penis shame anyone. The biggest problem is not the penises or the sex beds. Let people do their thing. But it's a little bit more significant. I'm borrowing here from writer and researcher Nick Yee, who wrote a really, really good critical work about virtual space called The Proteus Paradox, wherein he asserts that when we strive to emulate reality, we bring its limitations and our biases along with us. Second Life and its ilk were overrun with predominantly white and Western beauty standards, for example. The virtual dream houses are this homogenization of styles beloved by wealthy Californians. And as Yee observed, every house in Second Life has chairs in it. Why do avatars need to sit down? How is that an engaging experience for a user? I walk into a room and I make him sit. It's interesting. So you always have to be careful when you say that this is a thing of the past, because there's always some guy who's still making like $5,000 a month selling sex beds who's going to be offended if you tell him that this did not catch on. Like, I've been yelled at in conversations for saying, like, we're not all broadly going to be selling virtual goods. But I think to most people, to the average user, it just hasn't been that compelling outside of the novelty factor. This is like a virtual college. I didn't take this. A journalist from Killscreen did an exploration that you should read on the deserted virtual colleges of, I think it's restricted to Second Life, but other virtual worlds have them too. Like, wouldn't it, let's make like a welcome center in the virtual world for prospective students. And it's weird empty sofas in a forest and like 27 different options that all say get comfy. I mean, how are you going to get, how do you even translate the concept of comfort in this image? I don't know. So anyway, if you strip away the novelty, if you recognize the idea of living in a 3D world as something that has a lot of novelty factors, so what is left? Well, people made friends in virtual worlds that they like to talk with. They discovered new avenues on intimacy there. But those, again, became things that we pretty quickly began doing more easily in chat rooms on burgeoning social media platforms that quickly took over for chat rooms, things like that. So now we have virtual worlds full of ghost towns and half-thought artifacts designed by overexcited corporations. We dreamed of virtual conference rooms. Wow, it would be so fun to work with all of my global team and our avatars in the virtual conference room. But, we have a Slack channel. You just log in and type. Isn't that just easier? It's really hard to prove to someone that they should enjoy logging into a 3D world and walking their avatar to the virtual store to buy virtual goods when we have Amazon one-click buy. Everything else is self-expression and role play, and we will come back to that. But it looks like most people at that time just wanted, more than anything, wanted the internet to be a place where they could get things done. So none of these things I'm saying are particularly new or unique. I was talking about the sort of dissolution of the metaverse fantasy 5 years ago, but it was, like I said, a little more controversial then. As I said, when I mentioned that, I didn't think anyone was going to be earning their living on virtual currency, this man stood up and yelled at me, and "You don't know that," he said. And after that, I had him and 5 or 6 other people coming up to me to tell me I was wrong about the future. Because they were still selling stuff in Second Life and having fun with it, sorry. And maybe I will turn out to be wrong, but it feels to me, in general, like the tech industry spends a lot of time lavishing on the potential they see in edge cases. I think there's a new and vigorous surge of attention and investment in VR. And along with it, we're seeing some of these old ideas and conversations about virtual space. People are discussing, the same questions again about how our presence and embodiment in this space, about that and about how VR is going to affect the future of our social networking, especially now that Facebook is getting involved in that. And looming large right now is also the idea that supposedly stepping into a design situation or even another body supposedly offers us some opportunity to foster empathy or to learn other perspectives or to see the world through different eyes. There are a lot of complex problems with that view as well, but that's also a whole nother talk. In general, we are still having these conversations about how to make virtual space feel more real, how to make us feel more present inside it, how to make VR more immersive. When we've seen already that immersion or realism by itself is not going to be enough to make your average person put on a giant helmet when they could be browsing Instagram. Point being, we keep returning to the concept of virtual space as this literal representation, even when it might not be clear that there is a broad audience for that viewpoint necessarily. Again, that's just my opinion. If you still work in virtual worlds, that's great. We don't need to have an argument about it. So anyway, I still personally don't believe in the 3D web as a going concern. For all but the most creative and the most committed of us, I think. And now, by the definitions we've used so far, the internet did not turn out to be a place that you could go or a place that you could escape to. And when I started speaking, I discussed how there's no longer really any offline either. The internet is, neither is it a place you can leave anymore either. We can't escape into the internet and become someone completely different, but neither can we log off or go back to the selves that we were before hyperconnectivity and metadata and social media and shares and all of that either. What can we do? How do we discover and nurture and negotiate a sense of self in the liminal spaces that we have left? You can't really totally be someone else, and you can't be, just yourself. You're really going to have to negotiate your identity, at least in part, through this medium and through the lens of digital culture. Because at least people in our part of the world, in our lines of work, are really meaningfully struggling in general with how to be present right now. And the person who tells you to put the phone down and switch off is not being any more realistic or offering you any better advice on existing in the real world than the people who still see a future in digital beds and chairs. Okay, so this style of eyebrow is loosely called an Instagram eyebrow. Okay, you can note the precision, the boldness. Has everyone seen an Instagram eyebrow before? So even how it goes kind of into that ombre toward the middle of the eye, this is a beauty trend that loosely you can say began on the internet or took off on the internet. Entire groups of people online who are interested in beauty and makeup are definitely getting to define and refine these ideas together. The interesting thing about the Instagram eyebrow is that a lot of stylists seem to actually hate this eyebrow. Like, just Google "I hate the Instagram eyebrow" and read all the shade and debate that's going on. What looks good in a selfie apparently doesn't always look good in a face-to-face interaction. This looks nice in the picture, but in real life, it might be a bit much or a bit strange depending on your taste. However, that's not the point. This is a way of thinking about makeup that is designed for the selfie first, and the in-person experience is kind of an afterthought. If you're a young person today, thousands more people are going to see your selfies than are going to see the makeup you put on to go to school. Of course the selfie matters more. And here's some other even more interesting Instagram beauty trends that you probably won't ever see in the real world. This one in the top corner here is rainbow highlighter. Some people call it unicorn highlighter. You can make yourself look like you've pointed a prism at your face. Or you can go a little further of it, as the artist over here did, with the look of a heat map. I think it's called thermal highlighter trend. These are called geode lips because they look like stones or crystals. This looks amazing, but it's not for work. And even if you wore the geode lips like clubbing, it comes off in 5 minutes. You can't drink or, Again, it's not the point whether it's realistic or not. The point is the expression, the experimentation, and the self-identification that is occurring in digital space. So let's go further than talk about Snapchat filters. Not only can you now be a dog or a minion or do face swaps with your friends, they animate. Probably a lot of people have had some fun with this. It's to have fun with. And when you send one of these to your friend, it's not because you want to show them something genuine in that moment. It's not because you're documenting, as millennials are often accused of doing. There's a lot of those think pieces about how young people are documenting their every meal or whatever. But these interactions and these performances are not about reality. They are about self-identity and about taking control of that vocabulary. Every social app now has a beautification filter, which kind of refines your face into an alien kind of beauty standard. You get a version of yourself that is, more beautiful, assuming you're white or light-skinned. Unfortunately, most of these don't always work with people of color, which is a huge problem. But it's kind of an alien look. And if you do use one of these, nobody thinks I look like that. I know that my friends are using beautification filters, but that's not the point. So a lot of these very bold and very exaggerated styles of makeup. So this is contouring. You can use different colors and shades on your face in a structured way to alter the shape of your face a little bit. They actually have a history that predates these platforms that we've been discussing. A lot of this contouring, for example, comes from drag culture. These were techniques that were pioneered by drag queens and burlesque performers before the internet. And when you think about, what was the history of drag supposed to be about, I'm not an expert on this, but I would maybe describe it as, gay men, queer individuals responding to oppression and exclusion by making a performance out of concepts of gender and sexuality. The point of drag is engaging in that performance or exaggeration, and they did it to take some control over their identity and their self-image in a world that was dangerous to them. So what if, again, not an expert, just a theory. What if so-called selfie culture at least is a little bit drag-inspired in its collective unconscious? Like, are today's young people trying to take a little bit of ownership over their image in a time where they feel abandoned by the economy, let down by the education system, they're afraid of the return of conservatism? Are they coping? Like, is this how we cope? By finding a way to manage our images and give them new meaning? Because in general, like the generation we call millennial and those that are coming after have less control in digital space than ever. I love seeing my friends post pictures of their babies and their small children on Facebook, but like, what must it be like to grow up in a world where you've had an internet footprint before you were even old enough to, opt in or to shape it in any way? There's a constellation of metadata that's going to be attached to them from the day that they are born to everything they ever think, wish, do, or type. All the stuff you secretly Googled, like, because you were curious when you were a weird teenager. Like, today's kids have fewer places to hide. You can't really quite see it because I'm really bad at making slides, but over down in the bottom right corner of this one, there's like a baby bassinet with an iPad attached to it so that the child can reach up and touch the iPad like it's a mobile, I think. YouTube, as I said earlier, has a recommendation engine that's designed to work for your 2-year-old. Like, my parents wouldn't let me have a mobile phone until I graduated high school. Today's parents, they check in via text. They basically have GPSs attached to their kids' faces. It's a lot. This is the world we're creating for kids. And when they try to do, a little something for themselves online, then come, a million think pieces about how they're so narcissistic and navel-gazing, trite, self-obsessed, when actually, if you look at how young people vote, they seem to me to be more educated and more compassionate about the world than ever, at least much more than I was at that age. I'm in my 30s. Of course, even worse, you have concern trolls being like, oh, well, actually, though, young people are exploiting themselves. Women are marketing their bodies and their faces. It's bad for them. So out of one side of their mouth, they say that the internet is not real life. And out of the other side, they say that posting a lot of fun pictures of yourself means you're obsessed and that's all there is to you. I don't really know how they're supposed to deal with that. So yeah, oh no, I missed a slide. Okay, I'll just try. Yeah, so basically that sounds, you become the old man yelling at clouds when you become the person complaining about the narcissism of millennials based solely on how they use the internet. This is coping. We're making avatars. Here's some of mine. The idealized version you create of yourself on social media through pictures and through the things that you post and the way you represent yourself, that's your avatar. So we did not design 3D characters for the 3D web, but now more than ever, we're trying to gain control and ownership of the way that we project into digital space in a world that is now rapidly reducing all people to data and commodifying us immediately. That's probably all you can do, is to have fun and to play and to try to take control and to own this idea of a second self. And when old people hate something or when you meet with conservatism for doing so, that probably means that you're on the right track as well. You're doing the thing that all the old people hate. It must be right. So now I've just read this article in New York Magazine, When You Love Your Friend But Hate Her Social Media Presence. In it, the writer lists several examples where a person was so different online versus offline that it began to affect the way that she saw that person in real life. I'll read just a quote if you don't mind. Quote, "She was posting multiple times a day, increasingly in nausea-inducing poses with her boyfriend that looked about as staged as a romantic comedy poster, laughing and eating soft serve on a stoop, holding hands while walking over a bridge, stealing a kiss post-run. Soon they had their very own hashtag. It involved the word lover. I was traveling a lot for work then, and each time I mindlessly scrolled through my Instagram in airport lines and long jet-lag-riddled taxi cab rides. It was like removing the pin from a grenade of secondhand embarrassment. I started making excuses not to see her. I realized the relationship was over for me when she invited me to her birthday, and I found I could not for the life of me make myself go. She might have been hurt, but I didn't care. She had become insufferable to me." So this is just one of the examples from this article. Others could be, for example, finding out someone that you thought was intelligent is posting really awful memes. Or let's say they're really funny online, really sharp, with like a witty, edgy, sexual sense of humor. And then in person, you meet them and they're so quiet that you don't really know how to reconcile the two. Like, anybody have that like funny on Twitter friend? You know what I mean? That's totally a thing. So yeah, I read that article, and I thought, okay, well, if you hate everything I post online and you don't like to see, so many pictures of me, or you think the things that I write are stupid, then maybe we shouldn't be friends in real life. That's kind of how I feel about it in general. I have a lot of Facebook friends who, I curate my Facebook quite closely, so I don't friend people that I don't know well, but, they post good news or bad news or updates about their lives, and they always start them with apologies. Sorry to brag, but sorry to complain, sorry to post, sorry to post so much, sorry for all my vacation photos. And I find this guilt very strange, because presumably the reason that you've become friends with this person is you want to see them happy. You want them to complain to you. If I hate the sight of their photos, then why am I requesting their personal access to their personal life in this specific manner? Like, Facebook is a social network where you post updates about your life. It seems weird that you friend someone and then complain that they're doing that. But then again, on the other hand, maybe our original human definition of friendship did not necessarily account for this much exposure and this much knowledge about one another. We generally sign on to be friends with a person, not, to be friends with them and their online avatar. Do you really have to befriend a person and their internet avatar at the same time? I do eventually have to admit that more and more there is something of a big disconnect happening, so to speak, and it's taking place between that online life and that offline life. Just not in the way that people predicted. Just like the ways that we create avatars or second lives or second selves and so forth are very much true for us. It is just kind of different from the 3D virtual second life characters that the scholars of the metaverse expected. So we're using, mostly our own names and our own faces, or some drag performance of ourselves. We aren't even really able to be anonymous online anymore without somebody thinking you're weird. We've redefined anonymity as something that's evil and to be completely done away with. And in doing so, and I'm someone who, has been targeted significantly by a lot of anonymous users, and I still think, we overlook a lot of the reasons that internet users might want anonymity, like privacy or art, or to keep different parts of their lives or their identity safe. Maybe there's something that they know about themselves that they're not ready to share, that they want to practice with others. I don't know. When I was 14, I went on a message board, and I made friends with a random 30-year-old who thought I was old enough. And I totally lied to him, and it was awesome. It was one of my most formative experiences. Not that everyone should do that. But the point being, today I could never get away with that. You can't really pretend on the internet. As soon as someone gets in touch with them, you can find out who they are. And again, there are the think pieces about how anonymity is the magic ingredient that turns otherwise reasonable people into massive monster mobs. But these guys don't really care if their name is on their monstrousness or not. They'll do it anyway. In some cases, they become president and go on TV every day. So take the case of the Twitter egg. Twitter, of course, has a massive problem in that its platform basically doesn't work anymore because it has virtually no user experience tools. Anyone can make an account to do anything with for any reason. The anonymous eggs were bad, not because we didn't know who they were, because I can find out who you are these days if you at me, but they symbolized throwaway accounts with no relationship to the community or ecosystem. They were bad because when you see an egg, you mean someone did not invest in creating that person. It was clearly just made to, toss away. And typically clueless Twitter says, okay, well, we've done away with the egg icon. There's no more Twitter eggs. As if that fixes the larger problem they have about a lack of access to tools for users and a lack of a compelling reason to invest in an identity on their platform. So yeah, that's a little bit of a tangent. I know, we have a talk about social media behavior specifically coming up next. But yeah, I don't know if I feel that anonymity is really driving abuse. Yeah, anyway. continuing. Oh no. Yeah, where did the other slide go? Oh, sorry. So again, as with any time in history, as with any new development, it really does no good to look around you and say, how do we stop this? You know, you'd sooner stop the tide. You know, there's very little advice I can give about correcting or repairing these circumstances that we live in, or to recover from them. So let's instead face this and ask what it means that we have an entire generation of young people that seems in some ways more honest and more expressive and more comfortable online in text or in social media than they are offline. What's their sense of humor like? You know, what are they going to create using these platforms? And most importantly, are you participating? I think that is maybe the most helpful question. In what way are you participating in this ecosystem, and is it in your own service? Are you spending your energy trying to analyze, you know, what you think people are going to want to do in virtual space, or do you look at what people actually do? Are you doing predictions and forecasting for investors about the needs that you think are going to arise? You know, are we talking about people who are pioneering inventions based on what they think the sci-fi cyber future is going to look like, or are they participating in what is happening now? Because you definitely don't want to be the person who's still spouting VR startup jargon and pretending that you live in the book Snow Crash, but neither do you want to be the person who writes like breathless and untrue things about how intimacy has disappeared because of social media or selfies or this and that. You know, you don't want to be that person who makes everyone put their phones into a bowl when they come to your house, unless, you know, it's everyone at your house is into that and you've all consented to that arrangement. And you definitely don't want to be the person cranking out think pieces on how all the kids are like overstimulated, narcissistic WhatsApp junkers or whatever. None of that is going to help you, and it's not going to contribute to the space. So the only thing I can possibly suggest is to ask, you know, what is your digital self? What is your digital life? Is there a gap between those two things? And if so, what would it be like to just accept the existence of that gap? What would it be like to simply accept the climate of overwhelm and upheaval, a fragmentation of our attention, our self-identification, and ask yourself, you know, what do I need to be as happy as possible given that this is the real world? You know, what if some of the things that you need are online now, like your crazy Pinterest or your Reddit group or your Facebook Messenger window to your oldest friend who lives in another country now? These are things that have become important to you and that you shouldn't feel pressured to do it away with out of some arbitrary idea that the internet in general is bad. You know, it might mean, you know, for some people, they feel great when they delete their Facebook. I would miss mine. You know, some people carve out a space in their day to devote to messaging their friends. You know, others send emails every so often, and others like yeah, I'm going to call people on the phone because that means something to me. For as much as I have kind of exhorted everybody here to face the reality of digital saturation, I still have Chrome plugins that force me not to check Twitter or Facebook when I'm supposed to be working. Like, I need to be forced. Or so that I don't post impulsive and obnoxious things on Facebook when I'm feeling anxious. That's the kind of thing that works, knowing yourself and setting boundaries. I mean, like, isn't that the way we deal with anything? Like, is that really unique to digital life, or are we just talking life now? Like, how would you solve a personal, challenging dynamic at your office? How would you feel more motivated about exercise? How would you be healthier about sleep? You know, you do a lot of thinking, you do some journaling, you know, you talk to your friends, even if the friends are in your phone, and you find something that makes you feel better than you did before. You will navigate the reality of this new and evolving internet landscape, and you will figure it out, at least until it changes again. And we handle this the way we handle anything, through self-knowledge and healthy boundaries and self-care. But obviously, I didn't come here to speak for like an hour to tell you that the only answer is to just deal with it. I thought I would actually try to finish this talk on a positive note with a couple of things that I personally really like to do that give me a sense of power and control in my digital life. And they also make me feel like there is still beauty and art abundant in our idea of the virtual. First of all, I absolutely love what artists are doing with the texture and imagery of the internet. I love what they're doing with the body and virtual reality. Some of the most interesting applications for VR in particular seem to be coming from installation in gallery spaces. I think this may be like a public interaction technology and not something that we're all going to have big enough living rooms for. I definitely recommend looking into some virtual reality artists if you want to feel hopeful about technology again. It seems weird to say because this is my career, but I haven't been super hopeful about it in a long time. You know, I worry that it'll largely be shitty rich guys making all the decisions about this landscape for the rest of us. So we do have the option of setting about, you know, in the definition of our own cultural revolutions, big and small, and bigging up the spaces that are attractive to us and trying to bring ourselves there, even if, you know, even if we don't have a reason, like because it's there and we should do it. So I didn't get to see Nicola Nova's talk yesterday, but I really love his work on magic and superstition and belief in the technology space. I'm sure he definitely touched on some of this, but so throughout history, you'd have pagan beliefs or covens of witches or other kinds of magical folklore that emerge among populations who are either oppressed or displaced, or their lands are being taken over by, for example, Christian patriarchs. Magic and belief and superstition and things like that were in part ways of rejecting established social orders and like returning to nature, or to roll back new faiths in order to expose older ideas that were at risk of being forgotten. I think that there's some magic on the internet as well, and some folklore. For example, you can go on YouTube and listen to binaural ASMR chants. Like, that is amazing and weird 21st century thing. You can watch self-hypnosis videos. There are tarot communities on Tumblr. There are people who make fortune-telling apps, games. Like, I wrote an article that I would love for y'all to read because it just has some great things you could try in it. It's called The Divine Witches of Cyberspace. Isn't that fun? Like, we could like join a witch cult instead and take over cyberspace instead of like always having to go to investor meetings or whatever it is tech people do. There's even such a thing as emoji spellcasting, which I love. I actually do it myself after learning about it from a community on Tumblr. I have also in addition to the article, The Divine Witches of Cyberspace, I have a Vice Motherboard column called Oracles of the Web, where I interviewed some thought leaders of the emoji spellcasting world. In a way, it's like sigil making. It's like the pattern making we used to do in old times. Only we're updating the tools we use. You know, it's not so much that I necessarily or explicitly have a belief in the supernatural. It's rather that I believe that having rituals and having intention and having symbols associated with them can offer us a more peaceful relationship with things that seem frightening or that seem out of control, you know. Make up some spells to do with your phone. Trust me, it's really fun. To make an emoji spell, for example, let's say you generally have the crystal ball emoji at either end, which kind of creates the magic circle, and in between, or some people use the candle, or you know, something that works for you. And in between those two seals, you put the emoji that symbolize, you know, the event you're trying to attract or the thing that you want to have happen. And then you get your friends on social media to charge the spell by likes and retweets or whatever, which sounds so silly. Like, obviously, you know, we're not talking about, you know, we're not trying to talk in explicitly fantasy terms, but we're already doing this behavior of sharing and reinforcing symbols among each other. Why not do it with some intention, some pattern, some sense of spirituality, even if it's just silly and for fun, whether you believe it or not? Like, it determines where you shift your attention, and it determines what your relationship with the thing is. So this is like my favorite thing in the world. I like to watch something called satisfying videos on YouTube. Anybody else, any other satisfying video fans? I see some nodding, yes. All right, so satisfying video is a broad genre. Usually it could involve like mesmerizing repetitions of objects falling neatly into place. Or usually though, it involves like slimes, raindrop cakes, you know, weird experiments of form. Usually a knife comes at the end and cuts whatever jelly was made. Maybe you've seen some of them floating around social media. They're almost like being off-label marketing as anxiety cures. You know, I love to watch someone, they decorate a cupcake and they make the icing flowers so perfectly. You just sit in front of your computer and you're like, that's nice. I'm glad I got to see that. I'm glad of the internet that I could see that. Next time you're stressed out, type satisfying video into YouTube and see which ones really scratch the itch for you, and you can thank me later. I cannot help you get off the internet, but you can find things that work for you there, that are medicinal there. Satisfying videos, by the way, are massive. Some of these have millions of views internationally. Like, it makes me wonder if we're all kind of gravitating toward this analysis of form, like there's some kind of global pastime in watching substances lose their shape and then find them again. It's a sign of our times or something. This contradiction between form and formlessness is the perfect entertainment for the digital age. We're trying to decide which of our lives is the most real until we can no longer tell the difference, where something ends and something else begins, what the shape of things is going to be. Anyway, most of all, take care of yourselves, your relationships, your pictures, your data. You can't protect or preserve everything, but you can find new and better ways to take care of it. You can find a triumphant path to health by listening to yourself and taking care, no matter which of your many lives you're currently living in, you take care of that life. We cannot reclaim anything, but hopefully we can make a new claim and more fully inhabit the selves that we're allowed to be online now. Yeah, that's all I had to say today. I think we have some time for questions. Yeah? Thank you so much for listening. If anyone would like to join the discussion, I guess someone will bring you a microphone, I suppose?
Yeah. Any questions from the... Yeah.
Hi. I'm the only one to have a question here.
You'll break the seal. Everyone will. Your question will be so good that it will inspire.
I was trying to make some order because you mentioned so many different things, and I was not here yesterday. And I know Nicola Nova, but I didn't see his talk on magic. I had a question. First of all, about the age and the appropriate things that are for children, because we invited here a French psychiatrist 2 years ago, but it was a seminar for school, kindergarten caretakers, you know.
Yeah, for like a child care, for people who take care of little kids.
Yeah, for people who take care of 4 and 5 year olds. And you showed at least one slide with some children who are that age. And I had a question already about this because he said he has a rule, it's called the 3-6-9-12 rule, about screens. Basically, when you're supposed to leave, I think before 12, you're not supposed to leave the child alone on the internet. And before 3, you're not supposed to show him any screens at all, because he needs to be familiar first with the real physical world. Are you familiar with these
Yeah,
questions?
you know, I've heard a lot about this, and I just want to say I'm definitely not an expert in child development, and I'm not a parent myself either, so I don't know I have no idea what I would do if it were up to me to decide how to raise a child with screens. I mean, I think that sounds interesting. I'd like to read more of the research. I will say that there were the same concerns about screens in my childhood in the 80s, except they were computer screens and television screens. And, you know, the TV was the idiot box. It was going to rot our brain. It was going to destroy our imagination. You shouldn't let children watch TV. And a lot of parents did not let their children watch TV. You know, I wasn't allowed to watch a lot of TV as a kid. I could pick 3 TV shows a day, and they were all children's shows. But I was allowed pretty unlimited use of the computer, which is funny. My father put me in front of an Apple IIe when I was 2 years old and let me type and play with it, and I learned to write and spell on the computer. I learned my shapes and colors on the computer, and I definitely also did a lot of creative play on my own. You know, I did play outside, and I did imagine, and I read a ton of books as well. The computer was just, you know, my mother said to my father something like, "Are you sure she should be on that? She might be too little." And my dad said, like, "I want her to be employable later." And now I get flown to Geneva and paid to talk about the internet, so I don't know. I would probably err on the side of not trying to fight the tide of society too much. You know, I don't think it can possibly be good to have an infant in front of an iPad for 10 hours a day, but I don't think any parent would do that, you know? They're going to need to know how to use it. Why not start when they're little, right? Yeah, I would love to know more about that research, though. Perhaps you could email it to me so I could read it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else? It doesn't have to be a question. You could also share an experience that...
It's just a comment. I'm not mother myself, but my sister, she's got 3 kids, and she's really busy, and she does that, like the 3 kids with a laptop or a tablet for hours and hours and hours because she's really busy. So how do you fight against that? Right.
Well, I think a lot of the reason that she's doing that is probably because parents today are working longer hours that have less work-life balance and less, you know, we're working harder and being less effective and earning less money than ever before. So what about, you know, how can we support, you know, parents, you know, both parents who work, you know, like, are we not, if the mother has no choice but to give the child the iPad all day long, maybe there's that we don't have to look at the iPad, but instead at society and why, you know, families don't have enough support to spend time with their children and why, you know, it's not possible to have a baby and a job anymore like it was when I was born, you know. I don't know.
And I found it was quite nice to share watching TV or screen together. And that's a part of parenting, to share a nice film, a nice movie or whatever, as you do with a book or anything else. You just have to...
The parental involvement is what makes the difference for you?
It's just a tool like any other parenting tool, you know. The bad thing is to leave your child alone, totally alone, and that always happened. It's not something new. There were always children left alone. So I just think you have to deal with it like any other tool in your everyday life.
Yeah, that's really kind of what I wanted to say, is that these are no longer external barnacles on the surface of humanity, but a part of our daily lives. And it's about how can we live with them intelligently? You know, how can we give our children from an early age the tools to make, you know, healthy use of these devices and this stuff? And I think your idea of being involved with the child is quite right. Anybody? Thank you, Carmen, for microphone courier.
So I will try in English. About adults, I would like to know, when can we talk about addiction? Because for me, addiction is when we disconnected. We disconnected with the reality and we don't have a normal life. But then is the question, what is a normal life?
Well, exactly.
Professional life.
I mean, I'm
medically.
Yeah, like I don't know. Like as someone who works, I don't know if I believe in the rhetoric of addiction when people try to apply it outside. Well, it's really complicated, isn't it? You know, if someone is doing something destructive or if someone is neglecting themselves, does that mean they are an addict? Does that mean that does that mean the computer is the same thing as heroin? Like, I don't know. I don't find these large generalizations helpful to make. I mean, again, I'm not a doctor. I'm sure there will continue to... There's stories of people dying in internet cafes because they won't get off the computer, like, obviously. But I don't think that, like... there was a lot of worry in the 90s about internet addiction and, like, what if you can never log off? But how do we now evaluate that in a world where a lot of us have to be online all the time and where, you know, we feel uncomfortable when we're not on the internet for good reasons, like we want to know where our child is or, you know, we want to see how many comments we got on something. Yeah, I don't know. It's always my belief that we don't broadly have a problem with computers and addiction the way we have an opioid crisis in America right now. People are dropping dead from painkillers because they're turning to hard drugs because there's been such unethical prescription and lack of medical attention going on. So I mean, maybe there's some addiction in the computer world, but I would rather. I mean, we've got like really grievous physical crises to solve in the real world first. I don't know. Sorry, I couldn't be more helpful.
It's okay for me.
Any other comments, ideas? advice? Oh, I have someone in back.
About the children, I have a year-old niece, and I've watched her grow with the iPhone, and for sure it's unavoidable completely. She's drawn to it, and we're all on our phones, so for sure it's just something that becomes part of normal life. And with my children, I just set my own boundaries. I think we talk about what's comfortable for us. We set up certain times where it's appropriate, and like the woman said before, also being with them. That's the most important thing. I'm very interested about like digital anxiety and these. I mean, I like the fact that we have an ability to put our avatars out there and to maybe project parts of ourselves that we otherwise wouldn't show. But then there's also, like you just said, like I have to get online to see how many comments I got. That's a new thing. So that's a part of maybe, I don't know, it enters the real world, and you have this sort of tension and social acceptance, and I'm just curious your thoughts about that.
I completely agree with you. I experience the same. I don't know about addiction, but I do think internet anxiety is a real thing. I don't know if our brains were ever designed to handle this many tasks at once, or to know this much about the world at the same time. Like, it gets very overwhelming, and I think a lot of people really are struggling with processing that. I hope that this leads the market to respond with some more curatorial tools that can help us control our experience a little bit better. The norms and the values of the space are still being sorted out, I think. My wish is that when the dust shakes down, we'll have a better sense of how to prioritize in this space, and how we won't feel so universally compelled by everything. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of the ways these interfaces are designed, with like a big red number that pops up on everything, is designed to make you keep touching it. It comes from slot machines, it comes from video games. And again, that is maybe a place where the addiction conversation comes in. Like, if they've designed it so that we can't put it down, maybe that's a problem. We need to look to the industry then, which has not so far done a great job of responding to when I say, I want to have a better experience online. They don't seem to care about that. They seem to care about plowing you under in their crappy platforms and bad tools. So yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I feel the same way as you. I think I'd like to see the tech industry do more on the curatorial side, and I think that social norms will hopefully settle out a bit so that we don't feel all bits of information on the internet have the same weight. I think that's all we have time for today. I want to thank you all so much for coming and for listening so attentively. I really appreciate the invitation to be here, and I will look forward to seeing everyone this evening. Thank you.